It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the sports podcast owner of She Talks Balls podcast, Ra Ta. How are you doing today?
Hi, Brandon. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a sports soccer podcast?
Yeah, I think like a lot of podcasts that have sprung up in the last year, it started with just an idea I had in lockdown. Obviously, I am a college student right now, so I would usually play about 3 hours of soccer with my college team every evening. But being online and being at home, I had so much free time on my hands. I started watching sports a lot more. And I realized that there isn't enough women's sports coverage. Like I'm not able to see women's sports on TV or enough women's analysts or just, things like that. And that trend suddenly picked up where I didn't see too many women's sports articles in my newspaper or on my social media feed. And I wondered why. And doing a little bit of research, I realized that the coverage in women's sports media is very, very limited. So since I had so much time on my hands and since I anyways watch so much soccer, I follow it so closely, I decided to start this platform called She Talks Ball, where I react to matches, I talk about draws that happen, and just everything happening in the women's football world. And I've hopefully got a few people to engage in that as well now.
Can you talk about, of course, how you came up with your name, She Talks Balls?
Yeah, so She Talks Ball is, I think it's a play on the word when you say you play ball or, she plays ball. It means that she's come out to play and she's backing her skill. And when someone really plays ball, it's like, oh, watch out for that person. She's playing ball. So I think She Talks Ball just stems out of that, where women in sports have stories to share, they have experiences to share, and women in sports deserves to be covered. It deserves the recognition of all the media coverage, all the headlines. So I think this was just a small play on the fact that women's sports and women's sports stories deserve to be heard.
When it comes to coverage of soccer, particularly women's soccer, do you focus more on like the US national team or do you focus on, of course, the NWSL?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm based in India. So the sad reality is that women's football isn't really covered globally to that extent where I can watch matches all the time. Thankfully, the NWSL now has a global stream on Twitch, which makes it easier for us to watch. But I started off watching the US women's national team. I think they always make headlines in any major tournament. So that's how what piqued my interest in women's football. But I mainly cover the Women's Super League over in England and the Champions League, which is a European tournament. But I've been watching the NWSL since 2017 or 16. And now on She Talks Ball on YouTube, me and my co-host, we run a weekly show called the NWSL Rewind. So we anyway stay up to watch all these games at odd hours of the night. And we put up a little episode for people who miss the games, and we talk about our thoughts on the match, our opinions, our analysis of the teams, just to give everybody a little more coverage on the NWSL. But of course, when there are international matches, like when the Olympics come up, I'll definitely be covering that as well.
As you talked about doing like coverage all night long, can you talk about how difficult that is sometimes where like there might be like, let's say 6 games happening all throughout the night and you have to like keep track of all 6 of them so you can rewind them the next day?
Yeah, it's a tough job, especially with the NWSL. Right now, we take 4 matches at a time, but when the regular season starts, it's going to be 5 matches. I think it just comes down to watching whatever you can. The rest of the matches, we read up articles from people, from journalists who cover it, or we watch the highlights and make our quick notes on, who's playing well, who was playing well last week, and how their performance has been this week. So while we probably can't watch entire 90 minutes of all the 5-6 games, we try to split up some games and cover as much as we can.
I've noticed that you've interviewed quite a few people. Can you talk about, of course, some of the people that you've interviewed on your podcast?
Right. So the She Talks Ball podcast actually started off as more of a podcast that covers women's sports in general. It wasn't restricted to soccer. It just so happens that because I watch soccer so much, and personally, I feel a little bit odd saying soccer because I call it football. I think that the entire world calls it football. But yeah, since I watch soccer so much, I decided to cover it more in detail. But Some people I've spoken to, obviously, over She Talks Ball are people like the captain of the Brazilian cricket team and a few other women's football content creators over in England. So I think it's just a way of gathering stories of voices of different women in different sports across the globe in different countries, getting a sense of what their team is like, what their training is like, and what their matches and game day routines are like. So I think I just have try to cover all my bases in that sense.
Can you talk about, of course, I saw on your Instagram where you have a STB takeover. What is that?
Yeah, so I find it interesting that since I started the She Talks Ball platform on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, it was more of just me talking and me covering things and me doing this and that. And I realized, why don't I just give over my handle or just pass my handle on for 24 hours to one of the athletes or to one of the content creators or an entrepreneur who's running a women's sports business, and let them share their day and what they do in their day, how they train, how they maybe run a business, everything inside the mind of that person. And so I think in Jan, maybe that was my first takeover. And for 24 hours, I would give them the password of my handle and they would just do what they do on a regular day and share it with all my viewers. And personally, I got a great feedback from all my audience and my followers saying that, we love this. We love to hear stories from Brazil, from England, from here and there. And it's really cool to see that I'm able to amplify the voices of these women across the world.
Of course, whenever it comes to the takeover, are there particular players that you have in mind for the takeover, or is it like anybody that messaged you maybe the day before, you just was like, hey, sure, let's go you know?
Yeah, I think that's another great question. So firstly, whoever responds, that's a first tick box that, if they're responding, if they're keen to do it, very well so. And the thing is, sometimes only the big names or the high profile names make headlines many of the times, like you have the Alex Morgan and Carly Lloyd, but maybe a college player or someone who is from a different country who doesn't get that much coverage might not make headlines. You might not know of them, off the top of your head. They might not be a household name. So I also try to balance that out and get women who are not that prominent or who are trying to make it in the world, trying to do something, but there's not too much spotlight on them. I think I also try to target those people. And also, when I say women in sports, I do mean athletes, but I also mean journalists, photographers, businesswomen, owners, entrepreneurs, everyone who make up this entire community of women in sports. It could also just be a fan, someone who watches the game, has expert opinions on it. I think that entire community is something that I'm trying to sort of highlight.
Of course, as you said about Alex Morgan and Carly Lloyd, have you had the chance to interview them or run across them?
No, not yet. Unfortunately, I'm not that big. I did go for a girls. So Girls Soccer Network is this platform over in the US, and they were hosting this 3-4 day virtual summit. I was fortunate enough to attend that, and I got to speak to Becky Sauerbrunn, who had come on as a guest there. So I think that was my peak moment of talking to a US women's national team player. That was pretty special.
Of course, as soccer is so popular, have you been able to go to many soccer games and be a part of, like, let's say, the media for sport She Talks Balls?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the aim. I started this just maybe a year ago, so everything's been online. We've had no audience in stadiums yet. Cricket is a big sport in India as well, and I also do cover that. I have a freelance job in that domain, so I'm hoping to either get into sports media in the cricket department or maybe with She Talks Ball in the soccer or other sport department. But unfortunately, not up to now, I haven't been able to. And I think because I'm studying full time right now, it makes it hard for me to carry out this on a professional level. I hope to get into that once I graduate.
What are some of your future plans with your podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. As of now, I've just been taking it day by day because I've been doing it alongside my studies. Now I do have a 3-4 month break coming up in the middle of my semesters. So I hope to create content more consistently where people can keep coming back for new and fresh ideas, fresh content. The future, I think, I started this with just the aim of creating more content, coverage, and conversation around women's sports. I never thought of monetizing it or making it into a job or anything like that. And I think that is what keeps driving me. I feel like when you start chasing numbers, it becomes a burden for you. You don't feel like doing it. The fact that I create videos every day right now is because I enjoy doing it, because I get a great feedback from it, and I'm not burdened down by oh, how many views did this get, or oh, how much am I making out of this, or oh, I don't have sponsors, things like that. So I think for me, the future is just keeping this plain, keeping this simple, amplifying as many voices from across the globe as I can with doing podcasts, with you and with other people. I think this is just a way of creating conversation around the women's sports community.
Can you talk about, of course, some of the challenges you faced as you are a college student and you have a podcast? Because I know firsthand that was one of the biggest challenges with me. I had a podcast and I was going to college, and it was like kind of like, do I record a video here or do I study here?
Yeah, fair enough. There's always that dilemma that comes up where I think for me, because a lot of my college life had been stopped due to COVID. I was just going online, studying and doing my assignments, chatting with some friends, but I had a good chunk of time to focus on She Talks Ball. And because I anyways try to prioritize and schedule my day in such a way that I do all my work and I watch all the matches that are happening. I think that's my priority right now. So once I finish my work and I watch the matches, I'm thinking, I've anyway spent 90 minutes watching this game. Why don't I spend 5 minutes talking about this, creating a short video? People can learn what my thoughts were. Maybe if they missed the match, they can catch some highlights. So as of now, I haven't faced that time constraint. Obviously, there are other constraints in terms of just pumping out content consistently. If you're a content creator, you can't just put up a video once in 3 months, right? Because people are like, what's happening here? So I think consistency has been a big factor, and sometimes you have to maybe give up something to then put out content. But I think because I enjoy it so much, it doesn't feel like a burden or a task or a chore that I have to do. It just feels like, oh yeah, I'm going to look forward to this video. I have 2 hours and I'm going to really edit this well and put this out there. So for me, I think haven't faced too many constraints. Obviously, once I'm back physically on campus, it might be a different story.
What are some of your future plans as you look forward to the year?
Graduating. I have 1 more year left, so I will study hard and graduate with my degree in psychology and entrepreneurship. That's my plan for sure. I think post that, I'm still in 2 minds whether I go directly into a master's, which will be somewhere in the sports media department. What I'm thinking at the moment, it would be in the sports realm of education. But look, times are changing, they're uncertain. Everything is just day by day at this point. COVID is pretty bad in India right now. So our priority is just to stay at home and stay healthy, stay safe. Once hopefully this clears up very quickly, everyone's vaccinated and COVID is something of the past. I really hope to go to more stadiums, watch matches, cover them, freelance, tie up with some sporting organizations where I can be their media representative or be their host or their interviewer and really get some content out there, mostly in the women's sports world, because I think that's where the content is lacking. But yeah, those are my future plans as of now.
What advice would you give upcoming future soccer podcasts that are looking to get started?
Yeah, my advice would be get started. Don't wait. I think for me, I pondered a lot on what name should I have, what color should my logo be, this, that. I wanted it to be a little professional and not just do it haphazardly and then get stuck. But I realized that I should just start and then learn from the mistakes I make and learn from the experiences. Obviously, if you're an up and coming podcaster, one would be talk to people who started podcasts, right? They're going to be the best ones to give you advice, tell you what mistakes they made, so at least you don't make the same mistakes. But it's important to get started. It's important to learn and grow from the feedback you receive. I think that's a big way to create good content, is to create content for the people and take their inputs and thoughts into account. But yeah, it would just be to get started. I mean, there's no better time than the present. You don't know tomorrow something else could happen and, X, Y, Z. So just take the opportunity as you get it. And definitely hit people up. You can hit me up on She Talks Ball on Instagram and Twitter if you want to talk on how to start a podcast. I'm sure Brandon has great advice as well. It just comes down to, I think in the sports world, mentors and people who can guide you are a big factor. Obviously, podcasts are just a fun thing that people can do. You don't really need a mentor for that. But it's always good to get second and third opinions on any project you start.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find, of course, She Talks Ball's podcast at on social media and podcast platforms?
Yeah, so as of now, we're just a video podcast because we have daily episodes and we sort of put in intercuts of images and things as well there. So you can find us on She Talks Ball on YouTube. I'm sure Brandon will tag us as well. You can find me on Instagram at She Talks Ball and Twitter at She Talks Ball. It's a pretty simple handle, isn't it?
Thank you again for your interview and best of luck in your future with She Talks Ball's podcast.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again for your interview and best of luck.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.